We begin with the global vaccination race. The latest data shows more than 400 million people have now received at least a single dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. But the monumental rollout differs widely between countries. Researchers at Britain's Oxford University have been pulling together data on the vaccines. As of Saturday, their tracking website shows some 431 million people have gotten a jab. In terms of sheer numbers, the United States tops the list with more than 117 million people. India comes next with 88 million. Then there's Britain with 32 million. But when you adjust the numbers for population size, there's a difference. The U.S. drops to fourth place with 35% of people getting a vaccine dose. Chile is third at 40%. Britain is just shy of half the population. And Israel is the global leader, having given a shot to more than 61% of people. Its aggressive campaign began in December, and more than half the population is now fully vaccinated. Over the past several months, daily case numbers have also been dropping. Johns Hopkins University reports that Israel logged 120 cases Monday, down from a record high of nearly 12,000. Britain kick-started the West's vaccination rollout, beginning with the elderly. 95% of people in England aged 60 or over have now been given at least one dose. In Japan, less than 1% of the population has gotten a dose of COVID-19 vaccine, with authorities now kicking off a campaign to vaccinate the elderly. The shift comes as Tokyo and other prefectures are taking stricter measures to deal with a recent surge in cases. In western Tokyo, people are getting the first shot of the Pfizer vaccine. Nearly 2,000 residents in Hachioji City are to be vaccinated by the end of next week.
It didn't hurt at all. It's all right.
I'm relieved because I go out a lot.
The government says that by the end of June, it should have enough doses for the country's 36 million elderly residents. But many doctors tasked with vaccinating the elderly have not yet been inoculated themselves. Vaccinating the country's nearly 5 million healthcare workers started in February, but just over 20% had received their first shot as of last Friday. Doctors in Hachioji City are no exception. They have to protect themselves with masks and face shields.
Healthcare workers should be fully vaccinated before we give shots to residents.
Ishizuka says healthcare workers are giving shots out of a sense of duty because no one else can do it. Meanwhile, Tokyo, Kyoto, and Okinawa introduced stricter preventive measures on Monday. 3 other prefectures took similar steps last week. Governors are asking bars and restaurants to close by 8 p.m. Residents are urged to avoid non-essential outings. Officials in the capital reported 306 new cases on Monday. The daily tally has surpassed the figure from a week earlier for 12 straight days. Tokyo's governor says rising case numbers in the capital are being driven by variants of the virus. She says the situation could affect access to medical services.
If we don't contain the virus now, we will be forced to reduce the number of inpatients and medical operations to secure enough hospital beds.
Tokyo officials have begun inspecting restaurants and bars to see if they're taking preventative measures, including adequate social distancing among customers and installing partitions. Officials plan to continue intensive patrols until the end of June. Across the country, more than 2,100 new cases were reported on Monday. Over a quarter of them were confirmed in the western prefecture of Osaka, where stricter measures have been in place for a week. Governor Yoshimura said he'll study the effects of the measures for another week, but he said if the measure's efficacy is deemed insufficient, he will call on the government to issue a state of emergency for Osaka. Japan's prime minister says the country should not delay a decision on how to dispose of treated water that comes from the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant.
The disposal of the treated water will be unavoidable for Fukushima's recovery from the 2011 disaster. I recognize that it is an issue that cannot be put off.
The government seems set to announce as early as Tuesday that it plans to dilute the wastewater and then release it into the ocean. The water goes through what's called the Advanced Liquid Processing System in order to remove most radioactive elements. It still contains tritium. The government says it'll ensure the radioactive element is well below Japan's national regulations before releasing it. The Tokyo Electric Power Company currently stores the water in tanks, but those could fill up next year. Suga says he's aware that some people, particularly fisheries workers, are against the idea because they worry about their reputation. He says the government will address that by providing scientific evidence to back up the plan. Members of several groups that are concerned with the plan are calling on the government to review it and look for alternatives.
It's not just the fisheries industry. Tourism and agriculture will also be affected. That will not lead to Fukushima's recovery.
The group says the government doesn't appear to be fully considering other options, such as constructing large tanks that are suitable for long-term storage. NHK's latest poll shows that the approval rating of Prime Minister Suga's cabinet has risen slightly. The approval rate stood at 44%, up 4 percentage points from last month. The disapproval rate was 38%, up 1 point. The results are based on responses from more than 1,200 people over the weekend. Tokyo, Osaka, and 4 other prefectures are taking stricter anti-COVID-19 measures without declaring a state of emergency. Asked whether a state of emergency should be declared for regions with spikes in new cases, 70% said yes, while 20% said it's not necessary. Amid the pandemic, the Tokyo Olympics are scheduled to kick off in July, followed by the Paralympics. 34% of the respondents said the games should be carried out with a limited number of spectators, while a quarter said they should be held without spectators. 32% said the games should be canceled. Turning now to Myanmar, where the military has been escalating its crackdown on civilians before the coming New Year holiday. Local media reported the military carried out an airstrike on Monday against ethnic militants in the northern state of Kachin. The number of citizens killed by security forces since the February 1st coup rose to 706 on Sunday. A human rights group says on Friday alone, there were 82 fatalities in the central city of Bago. NHK World's senior correspondent in Yangon, Inuma Satoshi, has more on what's happening in Myanmar.
The military is intensifying its crackdown on citizens' protests throughout the nation. In the central city of Bago on Friday, soldiers used heavy weapons, including rifle grenades, as well as small arms. A local human rights group says 82 people were killed on that day alone. Recently, protesters have adopted new tactics. In the largest city of Yangon, young people have been mounting guerrilla activities, setting tires alight and scattering garbage, then fleeing the scene before soldiers and police arrive. The prolonged unrest is having a big impact on people's lives. People are avoiding going out as much as possible due to safety concerns. The market here used to be busy until early afternoon, but now it's only open for a couple of hours early in the morning. Prices are also unstable as the disturbances interfere with supply chains. The civil disobedience movement, in which people are refusing to work to try to force the military to suspend its rule, has dealt a blow to people's lives. Bank workers are taking part in the campaign, making it difficult for people to withdraw cash. Long lines can be seen in front of banks and ATMs. Groups of mainly young people across the country continue to put their lives in danger by protesting on the streets. Myanmar will have a week-long holiday starting Tuesday to mark the new year. It's a time when people splash water on each other and sing and dance. But this year, there are calls for people to mourn the dead instead of celebrating. The military, which wants to pretend things are getting back to normal, may step up its suppression of protest during the holiday. There are fears more people will lose their lives to the violence.
A lawyer for Komuro Kei, who's to be engaged to Japan's Princess Mako, says his client intends to provide funds to settle a financial issue between his mother and her former fiancé. The planned engagement of Komuro and Princess Mako, a daughter of Crown Prince Akishino, was announced in 2017. But after weekly magazines and other media reported on the financial trouble, the Imperial Household Agency announced postponement of preparatory events for the wedding. Komuro outlined the details of the financial issue in a document released last Thursday. His lawyer Ueshiba Naoji told reporters on Monday that the document simply described how the issue had developed and corrected misinformation in what had been reported. The lawyer added that it's become difficult to settle the issue through discussions. He said Komuro is now prepared to provide money to settle the issue, and that Komuro has spoken with the princess about his ideas of a monetary settlement.
Nuclear energy chief says emergency power is in use at the Natanz Nuclear Development Center. Iran described the loss of power there as nuclear terrorism. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin visits an Israeli Air Force base to inspect the country's missile defense system. In Ukraine, part-time defense forces carry out military exercises as tension with neighboring Russia shows no sign of easing. And India passes Brazil as the country with the second most coronavirus infections, with 13.5 million cases.
Police believe an accidental discharge of a weapon caused the death of a young man who is black near Minneapolis last night. The authorities told a news conference that the policewoman who had attempted to detain Dante Wright had tried to reach her taser instead of her gun. In light of the new police shooting, the judge in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis policeman charged with George Floyd's deadly arrest last May, has denied a defence request to isolate or sequester the jurors. Iran has said it will take revenge for an attack on a key nuclear site at the Natanz uranium enrichment plant, for which it has blamed Israel. And the Dukes of Cambridge and Sussex have paid tribute to their grandfather. Prince William described him as an extraordinary man. Prince Harry said he was a man of service.